Hello, everyone. This is Hazel, and you're listening to the Strong Mind podcast. In this episode, I speak with a good friend of mine, Emily Harrington. Emily is an amazing all-round athlete. She is a rock climber, mountaineer, skier. She used to do the competitions as a kid and was a very strong sport climber and still is. Then she sort of moved into trad and mountaineering. She summited Everest. She summited Ama Dablam. She free climbed Golden Gate in a day, which is pretty mind-blowing. That's a really hard route to do in many days, as I know. So to do it in a day is pretty crazy. She's also a new mother, and we chat pretty extensively about what motherhood has meant to her so far and how it's changed her life. We talk about the issues surrounding motherhood, including identity and body image. We start the conversation talking about her childhood and her experiences as a competitor. We also talked a bit about her issues with undereating as a young competitor and how she reflects on that now. And it's pretty interesting, actually, because she said some things that surprised me, actually. And then we talked about some of the goals that she's done, her achievements. We talked about how she sets goals in general. We talked about motivation. We talked a bit about social media and social validation, and also a little bit about sort of how social media has changed and sort of the pressures that are now on athletes to talk about things in a certain way online. And we talked quite a bit about risk and how her concept of risk has changed since becoming a mother, and also her relationship with Adrian, who is also a professional athlete and high altitude mountaineer and skier. Okay. This was a fun one. Emily and I are good friends, and we actually climbed in the high Sierras when she was, I don't know, I think 4 months pregnant or something, which was pretty interesting experience for me. And as ever, I was just completely impressed by Emily and what she can do. She's definitely up there as one of the best athletes in the world, in my eyes, for sure. So anyways, thanks for listening, and I really hope you enjoy this conversation. Hey, Emily.
Hi, Hazel. How's it going?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm wonderful right now, actually.
Yeah, you look wonderful.
Thank you.
Motherhood has agreed with you.
Yeah, so far. I mean, it's hard, but it's been mostly really good.
Nice. Yeah, so we'll get into that maybe a bit later, but I kind of want to just start at the start. And yeah, because you were like a proper climbing kid, weren't you? Like, when did you start?
I was a proper climbing kid. Yeah, I started when I was 10 years old, and I started in the climbing gym doing climbing competitions. That was my world for the first more or less decade of climbing.
Right, yeah. And okay, this might be like a bit of a heavy question to get us going, but what do you think were like the things in your childhood, like the people or like environmental factors that like most contributed to your climbing career, like as you look back on it now? And this may, I don't know whether like being a mum yourself has like shone a new light on your childhood as well.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of luck involved and like some privilege because I grew up in Boulder, Colorado. So it's just such an outdoor focused town. It was sort of the mecca of climbing at the time in the US. And I just kind of fell into it. But at the same time, I had parents who were very outdoor focused. My dad brought me skiing every weekend. That was my first sport, was skiing. And he was super passionate about the outdoors. And I discovered climbing on an artificial wall. And basically, as soon as I found climbing, I begged him to take me. I just said, I want to do this more. How do I do it? So he brought me to the local climbing gym. And then I got on the junior climbing team, and that junior climbing team had people like Daniel Woods and a bunch of other athletes who, went on to be not professional climbers, but really high level climbers. And so I think it was just that environment that I was sort of raised in that contributed to that path.
Yeah. I really put you down as this like really determined person. Like you're kind of like a never give up kind of person. Was there anything that was there in your childhood, like whether it was like the personalities of your parents or like the kind of the vibe on the team that kind of contributed to that? Or do you think it was more like just a deep-seated personality trait?
That's a good question. I think I have this. As a kid, I was super competitive and I didn't really like to do things that I wasn't good at or that I wasn't going to be the best at. And so I think it was a personality trait. Also, I grew up with two cousins. I'm an only child, but I had two cousins who were boys who were similar in age to me. And it was just like this constant competition all the time for me. Like I always just wanted to do something better than them. And we all actually started climbing together. And I just remember it was like my life goal to just always be better than them at everything. And yeah, even in school, it was like if I didn't do well in school, I was super hard on myself. I put a lot of pressure on myself. I was really hard on myself. And my parents weren't really, they were a little bit more laid back, very supportive, obviously, but I never felt any external pressure, I think. So a lot of it was internal, I would say.
Where do you think that was coming from?
I don't know. It's kind of as long as I can remember, I was really motivated to push myself in every way. So, and I think maybe environmental a little bit because my parents allowed me to be on competitive teams and do competitive things. But I don't ever remember not being that way, if that makes any sense.
Would you describe yourself as a perfectionist?
Absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, and we can dive into this more. I've softened, I think, a lot on those traits. I think just like for self-preservation, especially recently. But it's definitely something I've had to actively work on. But I was for sure a perfectionist in my younger years.
So what things do you think you've done that have helped you manage that perfectionism?
Well, I mean, I've just been forced into it, I think, by having a kid. Like, you just have to let go of a lot of things when you have a baby in your life. And I think over the years, I've come to a place where I am able to let go of perfectionism. I think through climbing, it's helped a lot, just realizing that you're never going to be perfect. I've always like strived to be perfect in a lot of ways in my climbing. And I think through the projects that I've set out to do and all the expeditions I've been on and all the places I've been to, there's a lot of exercises in letting go that you have to go through and realize that in a lot of ways you're not in control, especially when you're in the mountains, especially when you're on a big trip with a lot of personalities, when you're on trying to do a big project. It's just things are never going to work out the way that you want. And I think Adrian, also my husband, has helped me a lot in realizing that you can strive to do the very best that you can, but with the knowledge that you'll always fall short, and that's going to be okay. Like every day, you're never going to finish your list. You're never going to do all the things you want to do. And being satisfied and happy with that is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty key for well-being, right? Like it's hard to sustain that kind of those high expectations for so long.
Yeah, I mean, you'll drive yourself insane.
Yeah. I don't think of myself as a perfectionist, so I'm not like relating to that as much, but I definitely see it in others. My boyfriend, for example, is super perfectionist. What was your idea of perfection as a climber when you were younger, and how has that changed over the years?
I think my idea of perfection when I was younger was being the best and like being better than everyone else and winning climbing competitions, climbing the hardest grade, all of that. And I've definitely let go of that. One, because it's just not realistic. I'm not the best and I never will be. and it just didn't make me happy. And I think that happiness is something that I've like the definition of that for me has changed so much, especially recently. I mean, I'm sort of learning every day as a mom what happiness is to me now, and it's just so different. And in some ways, climbing doesn't even really tap into that sort of happiness in the way that motherhood does, or in the way that like sharing experiences with my family or my friends, whether that's climbing or doing something else, does. So I think that that's changed a lot. It used to be about achievement. It used to be about being the best. And it still is. I still do have a lot of goals and I'm still am so motivated and so driven. But it just feels a little bit, I don't know, it's like more rich and less single-minded, I guess.
It sounds like motherhood has really helped you move into a mindset that was more like, that's maybe less achievement based. Do you think that you would have succeeded in everything, or could you have succeeded doing everything that you've done, but had a bit more of a mindset that was less attached to achievement? Or do you think that like you really needed to be like, or I guess the question is more like, how have you balanced like being really focused and goal oriented with being happy, or with also like performing well? Because we all know that when we get too attached on those big goals, then you start to get like performance anxiety and like get super stressed out, right? And I don't know whether you can bring in your experiences on Golden Gate in a day into this, because that was a big one for you, right? Where you had to kind of like, you set this really big goal, but you also really had to be like super focused on the day and not be too anxious about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you bring up a good point, because I've found that most of my successes have come from this sort of process of having this sort of auspicious goal that's really far out there and getting really excited about it and working towards it. And then, like you said, getting too attached to it, getting too attached to the perfection and to wanting that success so desperately that it kind of messes with everything. It messes with my performance and my mindset and my happiness and everything. And then I sort of like, I kind of call it giving up. Like in my mind, I let go of everything, all the expectations, all of the desire. And it happened on Golden Gate for sure. I let go of all of that. And then only then am I able to succeed. And I think it's because I've let go of all the expectations and I let go of all the pressure, and I'm sort of just let myself perform.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a funny process because I'm not very good at skipping over the hard parts, the stressful parts.
You need the struggle phase.
Yeah, it's like I need to like exhaust that part of my brain and like let it do its thing, and then it's like, okay, now you can let go and you can perform. So I guess my answer is that I've been through it a lot. I've actually had to let go every time in order to be successful. But I haven't been able to get rid of that, whatever that is, that personality trait, that struggle part where I'm totally attached. But honestly, I'm kind of excited about this new chapter of my life, because I feel like maybe having a baby will kind of help me circumnavigate that process. Because I really just I don't want to say I don't care as much, but I'm just not as attached to things like I used to be. When climbing was the only thing I had, it was hard, I think, to separate that part of myself. But now it's a little bit different. Like I have goals, I have motivations, I'm super excited, I'm really driven, still get frustrated and upset about things, but it's just different. It doesn't feel as intense, it doesn't feel as meaningful. And so I don't know, maybe it's kind of like going to be my secret or my key.
Honestly, I think one of my reasons for becoming a coach, I don't know if this was like conscious or subconscious, was because I could see I needed something else to help me loosen the attachment to climbing and not have like, because if you've only got one thing in your life, of course you're going to be attached to the outcomes around it. Whereas if you have a bit more of a balanced life and you find meaning in lots of different things, you're probably going to take each one a little bit less heavily.
Yep, I totally agree with that. I think it's a great point.
When you were younger, you it sounded like you were pretty perfectionist, pretty competitive, and you also struggled with sort of weight and eating issues and stuff. Are you comfortable talking about that?
Yeah, of course. I definitely struggled with it. I think it kind of goes hand in hand in some ways with the perfectionism and the just such a heavy focus on achievement and being the best that I can be. I think, in some ways that, especially in climbing, the easiest way to do that and the fastest way to do that is to be as light as possible and to be as disciplined as possible. And being disciplined was quite easy for me. So that was definitely the way that I went and the strategy that I used for a while. Luckily, I managed to recover from it, like physically for one thing, which was really good because I know a lot of athletes don't totally recover physically. They kind of do a lot of damage to their bodies and become super injury prone and all the rest. And I think I got lucky and I kind of dodged a bullet with that one. But mentally, I would say it's still, and again, becoming a mom has helped me quite a bit, and going through pregnancy and postpartum and everything it's been really hard. And I've had all these like feelings and emotions that I had when I was 18 years old kind of come back to the surface, but I have a much more mature mindset about it. And so I feel better equipped to handle it. But at the same time, I would say it's still like emotionally and mentally, I still struggle with it every day with that sort of body image. Yeah. But body image and performance in climbing and kind of those creeping thoughts of like, oh, I could be better if I like was just a little more disciplined, or if I cut a little bit, and I do have those thoughts still. I definitely do. And I can definitely fall into the trap of like trying to go down that route. But then I can catch myself and also realize that it's not, definitely doesn't make me happy. That was one of the biggest things that contributed to unhappiness for me and to me sort of falling out of love with climbing for a while. And so because of those experiences, I can definitely come back around and I don't know what the word is, fix that mindset.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still there. And it might always still be there. But
Did you ever get diagnosed with an eating disorder or see anyone about sort of the psychological components of it?
I never did. I didn't really talk about it very much. I think it was during a time when people didn't really talk about it. I think everyone kind of saw it and was aware of it. But also, it's hard because you're succeeding and people see that and they're really complimentary of you succeeding. And so then you get this positive feedback. And it's hard because I look back on those years and I know that they were really foundational for my career. And so it's hard for me to say, I wish I hadn't been that way, or I wish I had done something different, because it did work out for me. So it's a tricky one because I didn't really get any help. Nobody diagnosed me with anything. I sort of just came out of it on my own when I finished college and started doing other styles of climbing and traveling more and kind of realizing that my lifestyle was really unsustainable. And I recognize that it can be a super damaging thing for a lot of people. And as well, it's really damaging to see your role models practicing that sort of behavior. But at the same time, personally, for me, I didn't go too deep, I guess. And there was no irreversible damage. Yeah, there was no irreversible damage. So it's hard for me to like look back and be like, I wish I had done something differently. I don't know. It's a tricky one because as athletes, like as high performing athletes, I think we all do a certain level of damage to our bodies that like probably isn't totally healthy. You look at like ultra runners, like running 100 miles isn't healthy, but people do it because they love it. And it's a tricky one because it's just, I don't know.
I guess one distinction there is that when you run that many miles, the thing that's unhealthy is still the experience of doing the sport, whereas dieting is actually something that happens away from the sport, isn't it? So I guess it's a bit different. But yeah, like, I guess there's always this fine line, isn't there, between like elite performance and really, really pushing your body to the extreme and being healthy. And having those two things coexist, I think, is possible because we have examples of it. But it's an interesting one in climbing because there's a lot of talk these days about how actually you can perform just as hard without being light, right? Like you just get stronger instead. You just manipulate the other side of the equation. And I always think of you as like a really good example of that because all of your hardest descents have actually been when you've been at a healthy weight, right? Versus, and obviously there's a much longer time that you've been at a healthy weight than and not a healthy weight. But I just wonder, like, do you think you needed to be that light when you were that young? And, you know, for you, is it just like, I'm choosing this because it makes me healthy and happy, but I would perform better if I was way lighter? Or do you think actually you've just chosen to get stronger, which is, and you sort of end up at the same place, basically?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose that through this conversation, I don't think I needed to be that light. I do wish I had better influences back then and better coaching and people to help me to say like, oh no, you should do it this way. And I can help you do this. And this is how you do it. I think, a lot of athletes do have that now. And I didn't really, I was a little bit on my own during that time. And so, no, I don't necessarily think I needed to be that way. And I have performed much better, especially on things like big walls at a healthier weight. I just don't think being that light and being that malnourished would have been to my benefit at all on things like Golden Gate in a day. There's just absolutely no way I would have the ability to climb for that long at that weight. But I guess what I'm saying is I feel like I, kind of experimenting back then with how to be the best. And I did come out of it and I did realize that it was too far. And I do think I did some like emotional damage and mental, like I struggle with it mentally still. But at the same time, I don't necessarily regret it, if that makes sense. Like I don't look back on it and think, oh, I wish I was different. I wish I had better influences, but I don't have these like deep regrets about it. It's more just like that was a period of my life where I learned a lot. And I've been down that road and I know it's not the solution. And I'm really glad that I feel like it's being talked about more. And I feel like young athletes have a lot of better influences now about it. I mean, I know it's still prevalent in our sport, but at least people are talking about it and talking about the damage that it can do. But for me personally, I don't look back on that time and think like, oh my God, that was so horrible. I just think of it as like a time where I kind of making the wrong decisions, but I didn't really have any good influences to show me otherwise. And I ended up figuring it out and I'm happy for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, we all do stupid things when we're adolescents, don't we? Like,
yeah. And I mean, it could have been something way worse. So it's like,
Yeah. You've been a professional climber for so many years. And until you've become a mother, you've often not had, that's been your full-time profession, right? So it's quite unusual. How do you kind of stay motivated? Like, what helps you keep that psyche high? And what do you do when you find yourself in like a low motivation phase?
Yeah, I think my secret to that is mixing it up. So I don't just sport climb. I don't just big wall free climb. I don't even just climb. I ski a lot, which is something maybe people don't always realize about me is I grew up skiing. Skiing was my number one sport when I was a kid. And then I started climbing and then I picked it back up. And so I'm super passionate about skiing and ski mountaineering. So I really like mixing those two passions. And when I'm unmotivated for climbing, I tend to switch to skiing or even trail running. Like I've actually run some ultra races. So I think what I've done is just expanded my mountain athleticism over the years I also feel like it's really healthy for me physically. Thankfully, I've avoided any serious injury. I think because I tend to mix it up a lot and I don't practice just one style or one discipline. And I do a lot of different things in the mountains, and that's helped me so much. And I have goals outside of climbing that are ski goals and that are, oftentimes less, even back when I was more of a perfectionist, I had placed less emphasis on them. And so they're way more fun.
Nice. And how do you set goals? Like, how do you figure out, like, oh, next year I want to climb Golden Gate in a day? Like, you seem quite good at setting goals. And I just wondered if you had like a process around it, or is it literally like what you're most psyched for?
I have like a laundry list of goals in my brain that are just have been there for years, essentially. Like I've wanted to free El Cap in a day for many, many years. And I eventually kind of narrowed it down into wanting to free Golden Gate in a day. But that was like years of kind of just working it out in my brain. And then, I have a sport climbing goal. Like I've always wanted to climb 9A. I don't know if I'll ever do it, but it's there. And as like my season develops or my year develops, I start thinking about ways to work in these different goals, ways to kind of, and think about what I'm motivated for. It's like, am I motivated to spend a lot of time in Yosemite, or am I motivated to go on an expedition, or am I motivated to go try to ski an 8,000 meter peak? Like I've had years where I've been motivated to do that instead of climbing. So I think it's just, I have this ongoing list of goals in my head. And in order to reach those really big, audacious goals, oftentimes I set like little mini goals. And those can be really fun. It can be like, oh, I want a sport climb 8C and this year, because I haven't done it in a while. And so then I'll focus on that. And that will be kind of a stepping stone to this bigger goal. But oftentimes I never even get to the bigger goal, and the littler goal is the one that takes over. That's okay.
Yeah. Nice. I like that. And so obviously as a professional climber, you get paid for what you do, and our achievements as professional climbers are kind of what makes up our career in many ways, right? And that does change, and there's obviously more to it than that. But I guess you could argue that without those achievements, you probably couldn't have a career as a professional climber, although we can think of some people. So like, how do you make sure that like your sponsors and like what people say on social media and like your peer group, like how do you make sure that that kind of like external validation and acknowledgement and respect that you might get from sponsors and your audience, how do you make sure that that doesn't affect how you pick goals and how you think about your goals?
That's a good question. I guess I've never really thought about that with regard to how I pick my goals. My goals have always been super personal. And I do think they've aligned pretty well with sponsors and peers and all of that. There is like, there's this vulnerable, insecure part of me that's like, oh, but will my peers think that that's super lame, that that's like not a cool goal, it's not good enough, or that it's not elite enough or cutting edge enough for all of these things. Sponsors I worry less about, because it's kind of like, now if you're sponsored and if you can kind of formulate a good story around an achievement, it's often even like more marketable to a company than if you just go out and do something super rad. It's like, if you're good at storytelling, then that's what they want anyway. And so if you think about it like that, like it's just marketing. It's, you're working for a corporation that's trying to sell jackets, and they want you to tell a good story and they want you to be inspirational and all of that. Like I can feel okay about that, but I do really care about like what my peers think. And that's when I can get a little bit insecure and vulnerable about the things that I want to do, and kind of like worry about what they think. And I would say that's like my number one insecurity, is like worrying about what my peers think and what the core community thinks of me. Whereas everything else I have a little bit thicker skin about, like, and also I just avoid like reading comments on YouTube and reading comments on the internet, because I just think that that's like worthless, like waste of mental energy and emotional energy. So I protect myself in that way. But I also do have these like vulnerabilities and insecurities, and have to give myself a little bit of a pep talk on occasion of like, I'm inspired by this. I think it's cool. and I'm going to go for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? How like you're more concerned about what your peers think, even though not the ones that like pay you, or like nothing actually happens if someone thinks something, you won't even find out if they think something or not. But our brains are just so socially oriented. I mean, I have the same thing, just like worry about what people think. And it's so frustrating because you realize like how ridiculous it is.
Yeah, it's totally ridiculous. And it's like when I have opinions or judgments about other people, and then I kind of self-reflect and I'm like, oh, actually, that's because I'm sort of judging them because I have my own insecurities. And that's, I think, what you have to remember about when you're worried about what other people think is oftentimes if they are judging you or thinking something really negative about you, it's because of their own stuff.
And most likely they're probably not thinking anything about you at all.
Yeah, most likely they're worried about what everyone else thinks of them.
That's my go-to. I'm like, Hazel, why do you think anyone cares at all what you're doing?
Nobody cares what you're doing. That's true, actually. It's a good point.
Talking about social media, I mean, things have changed quite a lot over the last few years, right? And I feel like professional athletes are getting held to like much higher standards. Like, gone are the days where you could just like write a post and not think about how you come across, and like censoring things that might like be triggering or like emotionally loaded, or I guess just more and more we have to think about what we say, right? How have you managed that? And I know you like have received some negative comments about certain things in your lifestyle in the past, and I just wondered like, yeah, how do you manage that? And yeah, like what's your approach to it? And maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your experience as well.
Are we referring to something specific or just like in general, like getting criticism on the internet?
Yeah, just getting criticism for things, right? Like I remember we've had personal conversations about some stuff that's come up for you, and there's nothing specific that I can think of, but like just as a professional athlete, it's like, you'll get a comment like, do you think you should be there? Or isn't that private land? Or like, don't you think that other mothers might be offended by what you're doing? Or, this kind of thing. And yeah, I just wondered like how you manage that kind of like the sort of hypercritical world we kind of live in. I personally feel like it's more so like that, where people are kind of, and I also think it's probably around like becoming more well known, your audience grows, but you also get put on this kind of pedestal, right? Where people like dehumanize you in some senses, and like you're not someone who can kind of make mistakes. You're like this person who has to be perfect. And I just wondered sort of like if you've noticed that trend and how you've managed it.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe a year or two ago, I was really sensitive to it. I was really like it really put me off and made me nervous and made me afraid to say anything on the internet anymore and share my life, and kind of like I kind of withdrew. I think a lot of people maybe did because they were afraid to say something, afraid to make a mistake. And there was all this fear around social media. And so I think my reaction back then was to kind of withdraw and just be like, okay, well, I'm just going to post a pretty picture and not say anything, and like, be really withdrawn about it. And and then more recently, especially since becoming a mom, like it doesn't matter what you say or how you say it, like someone's always going to criticize you or question it or whatever. And so originally my approach was to just ignore it, and oftentimes that works. Like you just ignore it, and sometimes other people come to your defense, and that's also fine. And then more recently, I've been actually, when there's a real, like, what I would consider like worthy or thoughtful criticism, I try to respond. And if I have time, and I've actually had really good luck with that. If I respond, people often, I think, like what you said, when you're dehumanized, it rehumanizes you. And people are like, oh my God, this person actually responded. And then it either starts a conversation, or I've had people just completely back away and like delete their comment or apologize or whatever. So it's kind of funny because everyone's always like, don't respond, don't engage, don't engage. But oftentimes if you do engage, it makes people realize that you're just another person. And then it can lead to some, it can lead to something productive, I think. As long as it's not like a totally out there, ridiculously insulting comment, then I just sometimes I just delete and block those people because I just don't have time for it.
I can see why people like don't do that, but at the same time, it's like if someone says to you like something in the street, it's just really different to social media. Like we could have so many interactions online a day, and we just don't have the capacity to engage with all of them. So we may as well engage with the people that we actually think are going to lead to productive conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always have to check in with myself and be like, okay, is this something I want to spend emotional energy on? And if it's not, then I just have to step away from it and like not look at my phone or not look at my Instagram or whatever that is. Like ever since having a kid, I've gotten better at prioritizing my time in better ways. And that's been really healthy because you can waste so much time and energy on internet fights. And I just think that that's like not how I want to spend very much of my life.
Yeah, and I'm the same as you. I never look at the comments. I look at comments on Instagram because there's usually not many of them, and they're usually pretty respectful. But like if I'm ever in a YouTube video or anything, I don't.
Oh my God. YouTube is a dark, dark hole that you can go down.
Do you have issues with like managing your time on social media and like having that just be like a low level distraction in your life at all?
Yes, absolutely. I think like everyone, I'm totally addicted to my phone and I'll catch myself scrolling. And it used to be, I mean, I just keep referring back to having a baby because it's obviously such a like big thing that happened to me. I really am conscious of it now, especially when I'm with him, because like babies know what screens are, like basically from the minute they're born. They're like, as humans, we're just like drawn to it. And when I'm with him, I'll see him like watching me like scroll Instagram and be like, oh no, this is really bad. Let's do something else. So I'm really conscious of it now because of him. And so I try to manage it better than I used to. I totally think being on social media too much and being on our screens too much is unhealthy. I think it's bad for us. But I especially think it's bad for the mental health of children and can be super detrimental to them. And I'm like really scared for the time when my son asked for his first smartphone. That's like a terrifying thought to me, like maybe more terrifying than him driving. So I've thought about it in a different lens in the last 6 months, and it's made me really conscious of my usage and how I use it and why I use it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I actually feel really grateful to be part of that generation, like kind of the last generation that grew up without the internet for a while, and then certainly without phones for a while. Like I got my first smartphone when I was at university, when I was like 19, 20 or something. But I still also just didn't use it like we use it today either, because they were still like sort of cumbersome devices. So I feel like we kind of still know how to be in the world somewhat, although I'm getting super dependent on it. Like, I don't know if I can read maps anymore.
No way. I couldn't go anywhere without it.
But I guess it is just a different deal when you literally grow up with it.
Yeah. I have this hope that like in the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to learn how to manage it better, especially with children, because I think we're going to learn how damaging it can be. So I have this hope that we're going to figure out how to manage it with children. Like I've read some things that they're going to start putting age limits on it, which I think is actually a really good idea.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so let's swerve to what I can tell you're dying to talk about, which is motherhood. But I want to start off with pregnancy, because I know that you went to Baffin on like quite a extreme ski expedition when you were in your first trimester, right? And then I know you did a bunch of other stuff, but including go climbing with me on the Incredible Hulk in your second trimester, was that?
Yeah, I kind of can't believe we did that.
I know. And it was really funny because I just so normalized.
I did too.
It's really weird because a bunch of my friends are like, obviously we're at the age where a bunch of our friends are like with a baby or pregnant, and I see my other friends who are pregnant like, oh yeah, I'm not going to climb for the whole time that I'm pregnant, or like I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that, and I was like, wow, Emily was like seconding 5'12", even 5'13". Like you were in like a 5'13" stem corner with like this belly, and like you carried our stuff as well.
It is funny to think back on it.
Pick an easy route, did we? Like we could have just picked an easy one, and then like could have carried the stuff, but like we picked one of the hardest routes on the wall.
It was some funny decision making. I remember we had that like crazy rock fall situation where we were above all those people and that rock came dislodged and I was holding onto it. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I had actually forgotten about that. Yeah, and then you had to let it go, didn't you? And there was people below us.
I threw it. Yeah, because we were climbing a route that like doesn't get climbed.
Yeah. Okay, so obviously, like you're not risk adverse. Like, how did you manage risk during your pregnancy, and how are you thinking about it now that you're a mother?
Strangely, during my pregnancy, like we've been talking about, my risk tolerance didn't change that much while I was pregnant. Like I didn't have that innate like response of like, oh my God, I have to take less risk right now. I was definitely constantly trying to figure out what I could do and how I could maintain my lifestyle while being pregnant. And it was more, instead of it being like a mental and emotional barrier, it was obviously just a physical barrier. Like I just couldn't do as much because I was pregnant and I was unable to, but I still wanted to do everything. I did go on a ski trip to Baffin with the permission of my doctor after sort of like explaining the situation and her deeming my pregnancy as normal and talking about what options there were for medical care and all of that. But essentially in the first trimester, the baby is well within your pelvis. So there's not a whole lot that can be done that could hurt it. And so I felt really good about going on that trip. It was more just about how, if I could manage the nausea and all of that. And, then with climbing is just something I'm so comfortable with on top rope, especially. And so I just felt totally fine just being able to climb and push myself. And I continued to train pretty hard throughout my pregnancy and push myself. And it's such a strange time for a woman. I think it's so personal. And I think you feel so your body just feels so not like you, that it is actually really, really important to be able to do things that still make you feel like you. For me, it was. And so, there's a lot of, going back to social media, you'd get a lot of hate of people saying like, oh, can't you just wait 9 months? And it's like, especially looking back, I'm so glad I climbed and I'm so glad I took care of myself mentally and emotionally, because it's not over after 9 months. It's far from over, especially for your body. You definitely still don't feel like you. It's not like all of a sudden you're just like back to how you were. So throughout pregnancy, it was important for me to maintain that. And I really didn't enjoy being pregnant. I didn't find it to be fun. It was totally fascinating to me, but it wasn't like enjoyable. It wasn't comfortable. It was hard to be pregnant. But so my risk tolerance and stuff hadn't really changed because I didn't feel connected to the baby at all. I just was kind of like, oh no, like what's going to happen once he's here? Am I going to love him? Am I going to feel connected? Am I going to want to be around him? All of those things. And then as soon as I gave birth, I think chemically and biologically, everything sort of shifted. And that's when the risk thing has been a really big struggle for me. It's been hard for me I always thought I was constantly during pregnancy trying to figure out like, okay, how am I going to be able to like not be trapped and not feel trapped by this baby? And how am I going to get my alone time? And you always hear about how moms never get to be alone and they never get to have me time and all this stuff. And now it's sort of like, I don't really want to leave him. I never thought I would be that type of parent, but I don't want to leave him. I sort of force myself to because I think it's probably healthy for both of us, but I don't want to be away from him. When I'm away from him, I have this like low level of anxiety, especially if I'm doing something that is dangerous or risky, which I still do, but I do it with this constant like feeling of uneasiness that I'm trying to manage. My risk tolerance has changed, I think, in the last 6 months because I think biologically and chemically, there's like a lot going on with my hormones, and I do struggle to feel like how I used to feel. So that's been really interesting and hard, but also it's still been good. Like I've been able to work through it with the help of Adrian and really like communicating and talking. We're really good at talking about risk because he's a mountain guide, and we're really good at like figuring out what is truly dangerous and what might not be as dangerous, and kind of like where we both fit on the spectrum. So it's been like a lot of communication, but it's definitely been different.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So do you think you've changed what you're doing at all, given that low level anxiety, or do you think you're kind of doing the same thing, but you just feel more anxious about it?
I think I've more or less been doing the same thing, but I feel more anxious about it. Like we spent the spring and well, we went to Switzerland. I guess what's changed has been my level of risk in skiing, just because I feel like skiing, there's just a lot more objective risk than in climbing. There's a lot more uncontrollable factors. There's a lot more that you can't really foresee. And so when we went to Switzerland and went skiing for a month, and especially when Adrian and I were out, the two of us away from Aero, that's when I started to feel a lot of anxiety. Like, and you know, when the Avi hazard was a 3+ in Switzerland, there were times when I was just like, I absolutely do not want to do anything but like low angle glacier skiing, because if something happens to us, like that, the thought of that just absolutely terrified me and paralyzed me. So that was definitely a shift. And that was definitely a time where I changed my behavior. And then with rock climbing, because I am so much more comfortable with it, I've more or less been doing the same thing, but still having to really talk about it. Like we spent the spring in Vegas climbing some longer routes in Red Rocks, which was super fun. And I have never really climbed long routes there before. And we opted to do that instead of Yosemite because the days in Yosemite are just so much bigger. And in Red Rocks, we could just go out and have, you know, moderately long day instead of an epically long day. But we definitely climbed some really run out routes and some routes that you would deem like relatively risky, I guess. But because I'm so comfortable with climbing, I was able to rationalize it in my brain, but not without, you know, some tears and some like conversations about bailing and wanting to go home. But I still, you know, I pushed through that.
Yeah, nice. That's interesting. And what about those kind of body image issues that we were talking about at the start of the call? Like, what were they like throughout pregnancy and then now through motherhood? Because obviously your body just changes so much over the course of, it's probably like a 2-year period, really, isn't it? Like, it depends on the person, but there's just a lot of changes going on.
Yeah. And it was really hard. I'm not going to lie. Like the being pregnant and going through pregnancy and watching your body change and experiencing it was really, really hard, especially at the beginning, because I just kept thinking about how far out I had. You know, I was due in November, and in June, I was just like, oh my God, I have so far to go and my body's going to change so much. And it was really just hard for me, especially as someone who's had that past sort of eating disorder behavior. I struggled with it. And then, you know, but you're kind of forced to confront all of these issues when you go through something like that. And so, in a way, I didn't really have much choice. And so I was just really forced to confront all these demons that I had had over the years about my body and body image. And it's been a huge struggle, but it's also been really cathartic to go through it. And I'm really glad that I did go through it. And I'm glad for that part of it. I'm glad that my body went through all these changes and that I learned to accept them. And now in postpartum, I am really having to be patient with it and having to, everyone says this, but like give myself grace and be kind to myself about it. And especially, I'm still breastfeeding right now, which is so much. I just had no idea it would be that much energy and time and just sort of sacrifice on my side, and just having to be patient with it and understand it. And also, I think I set my expectations a few months ago for myself, and I set them really low, and I kind of accepted that it was going to be a long process. I finally came around to accepting that. And I've been really pleasantly surprised with how I've been doing recently. And that's been good. So I think I've just learned a lot of patience and a lot about expectations and giving myself grace with the whole process. And it's overall been such a good learning experience for me.
That's interesting. I mean, because the thing is like from an outsider's perspective, it just looks like you're like absolutely smashing it. You were climbing really soon after birth, and like you seem to be climbing really hard quite soon. And, everyone's experience seems to be so different. But it's interesting that you feel like it has been hard for you and that you have really had to manage your expectations. And I wondered, how did you set those expectations and what prompted you to lower them? Because I guess we hear just such different stories. This person's climbing this like straight away, and then this person's spending like 3 years getting their core back. And, it just seems so different. Like, how did you approach all of that? And have you been setting any goals, or have you just been kind of keeping things open and letting things play out as it happens?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there's so many vastly different experiences. And I think that was before giving birth, that it scared me, but it also helped me set my expectations. Because you just don't know how your birth is going to go. You don't know if you're going to have a C-section or not, which would totally change your recovery. And so I had to go into it. You're kind of forced to go into it without expectations. I mean, you can't be like, oh, I'm going to have a baby and I'm going to go on this climbing trip a month later. You just can't plan for that. So it forced me to let go of that kind of expectations, perfectionism, like having to have a plan. We really had to be open to anything could happen, and we don't know how I'm going to be feeling physically. And so I just have to kind of go with the flow and hope that everything goes more or less normally. And so I think that throughout my pregnancy, I worked really hard to set myself up well. I do believe that staying active and staying emotionally grounded and being able to do the things that I love was really helpful for me. And I think it was really helpful for my recovery. And it is what enabled me in a lot of ways to get back to climbing and skiing. But at the same time, I think I was constantly mentally preparing myself to not be able to do those things, to the possibility that I might not be able to do those things. You have to be open to that. You have to be accepting of that. And so after having a relatively normal birth experience, I think that's why I was sort of pleasantly surprised, because I don't know, the way Adrian puts it, because he's a mountain guide, you kind of prepare for the worst, but then you hope for the best. You prepare for the worst, you have all these you're mentally equipped to deal with in case, it's the worst possible outcome. But then you go into it with optimism and hope that it's all going to work out. And so that's kind of how I approached it. And it did thankfully work out more or less okay. And so, every day when I felt a little bit more normal was kind of a big win for me. But at the same time, I mean, I think multiple things are true at once. There were times when I was so impressed with myself and so proud of my recovery and how I was doing. And then there were days where I was just like, ugh, this sucks. I still have that. Why can't I be back to how I was before? How come it's taking so long? I hate breastfeeding. Like, this is so annoying. Like, all of these things. Even though I love my baby and I love the whole thing and I'm enjoying the experience so much overall, there's a lot of frustration and there's a lot of struggle that I think oftentimes people don't necessarily see. Like, they do see us out doing things and having a great time, but there's always the other side when you have such a big change in your life.
Yeah. How has it affected Adrian? I know you were talking about how it's kind of changed your risk perception. Has Adrian had that same change, and have there been other ways that it's affected him? I feel like sometimes we really focus on the mother in the whole parenting situation, right? And we kind of forget to ask questions about the dad.
Yeah, he's been really interesting because he obviously is a high altitude climber and skier. So his specialty entails a lot more risk than I would say mine. I actually think rock climbing is like fairly safe. I still believe that. I think big wall free climbing is fairly safe. Like, I hope to continue to do it because I believe that it's safe. And so his specialty has a lot of risk. And, you know, we've lost friends recently to exactly what he does in the mountains, climbing and skiing the biggest mountains in the world. And so it hits very close for us. And I think that's where most of our conversations around risk have been focused, is whether or not he wants to continue doing what he's doing. And I think it's hard for him because I think he's definitely split. He so desperately has wanted to be a dad for so many years, like longer than I've wanted to be a mom. He's been ready. He's 11 years older than me. So I think for him, you know, he's been ready to have a kid for the last maybe like 5 or 6 years. And he's definitely taken a step back in terms of like what the level of risk that he takes. But at the same time, he's still really passionate about it. He's still really passionate about going on expeditions and being in the biggest mountains in the world and being very calculated about risk. He's someone who thinks so deeply about it. He's so thoughtful about it. Like, he became a pilot and flies small planes because he loves risk analysis. Like, he sees it as the same type of decision-making framework as the big mountains. You flew with us last year. And so he's someone that's actually really passionate about like decisions around risk. Like, I would say that's one of the things he loves most about climbing and skiing. And so I think it's been I think he has a lot of questions, and I think he will continue to go on expeditions, but he's going to be very selective about it. And we're going to have to talk a lot about it. And I think it's definitely changed. His like level of risk tolerance has changed, but at the same time, he's a mountain guide and he's so used to thinking about it and making the most conservative decisions. So I actually really trust him, even though what he does is super dangerous. I trust that he's making conservative decisions, but it's definitely an ongoing conversation for us.
It's often more stressful for the person who's been left behind, isn't it? Because there's more unknowns. Like, you're not there. You can't check in all the time. I mean, that's changing with a lot of these places as we're starting to get more kind of like satellite internet and things. But you still can't be like asking for updates every 5 minutes or whatever.
No.
He's, you know, over the course of your relationship, he's done some pretty dangerous and out there things, right? Like, what have you learned from kind of managing that side of risk, like being the one at home who's not actually doing the risky thing, but knowing that a loved one is out there doing a risky thing?
I think that there's a lot of trust in that person that you have to have, and a lot of open communication, and a lot of compassion and empathy in that they're doing what they're doing because they truly love it and they think it's worth the risk. I think you have to really understand that deeply and be able to empathize with that, because otherwise it's really hard to understand why someone would be out there taking such a high level of risk. You have to really understand that it's worth it to them, that it's worth that risk, that they've thought about it, that they understand what they're doing, that they understand that it also impacts you, the person at home. And so there has to be a lot of open communication and trust and empathy, I think. And I've learned that. That's not to say that it's not still hard and that I don't still struggle and that I don't still kind of like freak out on occasion when I don't hear or whatever. But I think those three things are super important, is that trust and communication and empathy and like respect for what the other person is doing.
Yeah. And not just seeing it as like a selfish thing, which I guess we hear a lot, right? That parents who do dangerous things are selfish. And I wondered like what you think about that and how often in society there's like more pressure on the mum, or like the mum is criticized more as being selfish if she does something risky versus how people see a father's obligation. And I wonder how much you've reflected on that in light of your own birth.
I've reflected on it a lot, in particular because of Hillary Nelson, who was my friend, who I went on countless expeditions with for the last 10 years. And she was a mother. And she was sort of like she's a high altitude climber and skier who unfortunately died this past September in trying to descend an 8,000 meter peak called Manaslu. And it was really tragic and sad and horrible. And she left behind two children. And, you know, over the years, I watched as she always received criticism for being selfish, for leaving her kids, for taking risk, for all of these things. So I definitely watched her kind of be unfairly criticized, I would say, for taking such a high level of risk and for continuing to pursue her career and, you know, essentially trying to balance it. And I think it's probably cultural and social, the reason that we place so much emphasis on the woman. But also, it's been interesting in the last 6 months to, like what I was saying, to feel that connection to my son and to not want to leave him and not want to take risks. Because honestly, it feels like I'm fighting biology a lot of times. And I know that Adrian doesn't feel that. Like, I ask him, I'm like, do you feel that anxiety? And he's like, no, it's more like when he's not with me, like, I don't think about it as much. I just feel like I used to. I feel normal. I have to, like, you know, consciously be like, I have a baby at home, you know? And for me, it's like very visceral. It's like inside of me. And I don't know if that will fade or not, but in a lot of ways, it feels like I'm fighting biology. So I think maybe it is a little bit biological, like the reason that women often stay home or don't take as much risk or whatever. But at the same time, and I think that for that reason and for the cultural reason, it can be very hard to like take those steps to continue to follow a risky career or risky passion as a woman. But at the same time, I had this great example of a woman who did it. And it's been really confusing for me recently because of how it ended for Hillary, to like sift through all of those emotions. Like, it's been really hard because for the longest time, I was just like, oh, well, Hillary did it. I'm going to do it too. And now it's like, fuck, I don't know if I want to do it too. Like, I don't know. I mean, it's been hard. It's been weird and it's been confusing. And I do think it's different for women. I don't think it's fair that women are externally treated differently, but I think internally it feels different for me. And so it's just been a little, it's been confusing. And I have the same reaction when men who are fathers die in the mountains, I suppose, and leave behind children. I just think it just sounds like the worst thing ever to me right now. And I just absolutely do not want that outcome. And so that's what I've been like kind of struggling with lately, I guess. Like coming to terms with that and like still wanting to do what makes me feel alive and what makes me happy. So it's been tricky.
I guess like everyone just needs to make sure that what they choose to do, whether it's toning down the risk level or carrying on as you were, that it's coming from like your own motivation, right? Like an intrinsic motivation. Because I guess it's when, you know, like a lot of women feel that pressure to not do risky things. But then we also, as things often happen, it totally swings, the needle swings too far the other way. And then you have people being criticized for not continuing to do what they were doing before, right?
It's true. Like you just can't win, basically. You can't win. And that, yeah, I think that's when you need to take a step away from all of that and really ask yourself where your motivations are and what they are and if they're worth it. And so it just takes a lot of self-reflection, I would say.
I guess with most like risk calculations, you've got to ask yourself, okay, so what's the worst that could happen? How likely is it that it would happen? And how much does it mean to me to not do this thing or to do this thing? And I guess like people's priorities often change, right? And they go, well, actually, this isn't the most important thing to me anymore. Like other things are really meaningful in my life. But then for some people, it's like to really stay true to themselves and to really like express themselves in the world in the way that they want to, they have to continue with the sports that they love. I think what I really love about climbing is like, I personally don't feel like I can be pretty satisfied with like the really safe versions of climbing for like quite a long time. And then I like build the motivation to maybe do something a bit more risky. Because a lot of the good climbs around where I live as well, like have some degree of risk as well. So that there's that motivation there. But I'm also totally happy to just like go bouldering or go sport climbing. And I just think that climbing is really cool for that reason, where you can just like really challenge yourself in ways that like aren't particularly risky. But I suppose some sports don't really have framework for that. Like, for example, if you're into base jumping, it's probably just boring if it's not risky, right? It's like it only gets interesting when you start upping the risk. And I don't know like whether you feel that way about skiing or like the more high altitude stuff.
Yeah, I think I feel that way about skiing to some extent, like going on expeditions and going to bigger mountains. I feel like there's just this uncontrollable risk that I'm not sure in a place where I want to continue with, I guess. And yeah, it's like you said, like everyone has their place that they land on this spectrum of risk, and it can change, and it's so personal. And that's why I have a hard time judging other people for where they land on that spectrum, because like you said, it can be the key to someone's true happiness. And so I don't want to judge that. And it's just so personal. I think it's important to be able to talk really, really honestly about it to the people closest to you and really ask yourself why you're doing it. And for me, right now, I really do feel like I'm happy going rock climbing, going sport climbing, training in the gym. Like I love it right now because it does feel totally safe. I can be with my kid. I can do all these things. I don't need to go on a month-long expedition to some far corner of the earth and be away from him right now. I really don't need that. And so, yeah, I think right now I'm feeling very similar to you. It's like maybe that desire will build up to go on a big trip and take a certain level of risk, but right now I'm not really feeling it. And that's great.
Yeah, it's sort of having the acceptance around that, I suppose. Finally, I have one more question for you, and that's just what's been your favorite thing about being a mother so far that you like never expected would be like your favorite thing?
It is so fun to like see the world differently. It's like understanding that he's experiencing things for the very first time is such a cool realization, and it makes everything more fun. Like taking him to the beach and having him like feel sand and experience water. It's like it sounds so cliche and cheesy and lame in some ways if you haven't been through it, but you're like, oh my God, this little creature is experiencing this for the very first time. And he just kind of watching him explore the world and understand it is a cool process to see. And it kind of changes your whole perspective on things. Like everything is more fun because he's there. And I love that. I thought it would be sort of annoying and boring, honestly. Like I thought just doing like, mundane things would be annoying and boring. They're not, because I just love him and I love seeing him experience things. And that's been the coolest. That's been really rewarding. And I just didn't expect it. I think I didn't know that I would be that kind of person. So
that's cool. It's like unlocked like bits of you that haven't been expressed before, I suppose.
Yeah, it's so fun. Like I think I had low expectations.
I feel like that's a bit of a theme among this podcast is like, just set the bar really low and you'll be happy.
Everything might suck. You should expect it to suck. And then when it doesn't, you're going to be psyched.
I feel like that's actually a really good trick on expeditions, is just like imagining it's going to be the most grueling, horrendous sufferfest you could absolutely think of. And then like anything else is a bonus.
Yep. Pregnancy too.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks so much, Emily. That was a great chat. And good to hear your insights as always.
That was fun. Yeah. Thanks for having me.